Hi, everybody. Welcome to Humane Voices, the official podcast of Humane World for Animals. I'm Carrie. I'm here with Kelly. And today we're pulling back the curtain on puppy mills, what they are, the suffering they cause, and the many ways Humane World for Animals is working to put a stop to it. And you, as dog lovers, can help. Today, we're actually going to take some audience questions into the mix for our experts. And our guests today are John Goodwin, Senior Director of the Puppy Mills Campaign at Humane World for Animals, and Kathleen Summers, Director of Outreach and Research for the Puppy Mills Campaign here. Guys, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to talk to you about this topic. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad to be with you all. I know Kathleen and John, you both have been on this pod before, talking about a few different things with puppy mills. But I think, Carrie, we're going to do kind of a deep dive today. We're like starting nose to tail here, basically.
Nose to tail. Nice.
You like? I always assume most of our listeners are, seasoned animal advocates, but maybe not everybody understands what a puppy mill is. Let's start there. John, what is a puppy mill?
Oh, a puppy mill is a commercial dog breeding kennel where the needs of the dogs are not being met. Now, this can take many, many forms. Traditionally, people would think of a puppy mill and they would imagine a building kind of the size of a small greenhouse with multi-levels of cages with a little doggy door with a small little enclosure on one side of the doggy door and a small little enclosure on the other. But they don't have to look like that. But the common denominator is that these are not the kind of places where you would ever want to leave your dog when you go on vacation. These are places where the dogs live in misery and filth, and they suffer just to produce puppies for the pet stores like Petland or certain websites and certain other retail outlets.
So, John, one of the things I'm curious about with puppy mill in terms of a terminology, is it the conditions or the numbers that define what a puppy mill is?
I'd say it really is more the conditions, but numbers is relevant too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can imagine somebody that has 100 dogs being able to provide the sort of care, the sort of individual attention that these dogs need. And puppy mills, they aren't making millions and millions of dollars off of this. A store like Petland might sell puppies for $4,000 or $5,000, but the puppy mill itself only made a couple hundred, or even only got a couple $100 per puppy, and that's before accounting for expenses. So they're not hiring, they don't have the funds to hire a lot of staff. If they've got 100 dogs, it's not like they have 12 people. So, each one can spend an hour with a dog. And so I would say the numbers are very, very relevant.
This is a priority for Humane World for Animals, correct? Why is this issue a priority?
Well, dogs are very important to so many families around this country. And most dogs, like my dogs, for example, they sleep in the bed. I spend time with them every day, give them the best care. But other dogs are treated like breeding machines and raised in factory farm-like conditions. It's a real schizophrenic thing where on the one hand, we have dogs who have excellent quality of life. And then you've got other dogs that have terrible quality of life for the purposes of producing puppies who then go on to have a good quality of life. There's just a serious disconnect there. So that's why it's a priority for us. It's a betrayal of dogs.
So when people are thinking about this issue, we talked about the puppy mill term. There's another term that I think gets tossed around a lot, and there's some conflation with it. What's the difference between a puppy mill and a backyard breeder, which I feel like is a term that's been around since the 70s. And I think people's understanding of what that means is maybe a little squishy.
Right. A lot of times we meet new advocates and they say, well, what is Humane World for Animals doing about backyard breeding or backyard, should we have a bill to stop backyard breeders? And I always ask, well, what exactly do you mean? And they may say something like, well, where I live, we have a lot of people that have 5, 15, 20 dogs in their backyard in hutches that they breed and sell. And I say, well, that's not a backyard breeder. That's a backyard puppy mill. Just because somebody's breeding in their backyard, doesn't mean it's not a puppy mill. If the dogs are kept in suboptimal or poor conditions just to pump out puppies for the pet trade, that's a puppy mill.
Right. Just because there's no technical mill, no building, it's still doing the same thing and treating the dogs the same way.
Right. And this is what a lot of people need to know if they want to know how to identify and how a puppy mill when they see one. They can be in a basement, they can be in someone's garage, They can be on a big farm or they can be in a backyard. The important thing is they're not giving the dogs the care they need, and the dogs are confined continually just to breed and create puppies.
Are people aware of puppy mills, do you feel? And if so, do they realize how bad they are? I mean, what's the public perception there?
I think, unfortunately, puppy mills are out of sight, out of mind for a lot of people. When they do go to look for a dog, no breeder is going to tell you they're a puppy mill. No breeder with poor conditions, or very few breeders with poor conditions, are going to let you see those conditions. They'll often say something like, well, why don't you, my house is hard to find, so why don't you meet me at the Texaco station down the street? And, so you're not going to see it. People need to realize that there are puppy mills everywhere, and they need to be a lot more careful and slow down when they're buying a dog compared to when they're buying a bicycle or some other inanimate object.
John, talk a little bit about the conditions. Kathleen brought up the conditions, and what is it like for the pups there? What is it like for the breeding dogs? I mean, since we can't see them generally, give people a window into that.
Well, when people think of puppy mills, of course, they think of the puppies. But the real suffering is with the breeding dogs because the puppy might be there for 8 weeks. The breeding dog might be there for 8 years. And basically, these are just high volume breeding kennels where the dogs are just in rows of cages. And this is a very barren existence. It's not like they're being given nice, comfortable beds to sleep on or any toys to play with. They just sit in their little cages. I've gone along with our rescue team on puppy mill raids, and it's heartbreaking. You see these little teacup poodles that I remember from North Carolina, and I walked into the building, and respect to the rescue team because they do this all the time. I couldn't stay 5 minutes in that building without my lungs burning from all the ammonia, and I was just so upset because I saw this little brown teacup poodle just spinning in a circle over and over and over again because she had nothing else to do to burn any energy. And that's the life of a dog in a puppy mill. It's just just a very barren, empty existence.
I think that y'all have not only seen these places in person, but part of the work you do is about what is being captured by the people who are tasked with supposedly holding these places accountable. And so some of the work that I think, Kathleen, you and your team look at is documenting these conditions directly, right? Can you talk a little bit about like not only the things you've seen, but some of the things that turn up in just basic inspection reports that get like a slap on the wrist?
So we scour as many inspection reports as we can find to find out what is going on at puppy mills that are inspected, either by the federal government or a state agency. What are they finding and what are they doing about it? So what we have found is that, as you may imagine, some pretty horrible conditions where animals were emaciated, animals were injured and had not been taken to a vet, puppies were out in the cold without any adequate protection, animals had moldy food or no food at all. And then the next question you have is, well, what is being done about it? Well, the only reason we know sometimes about these conditions, since they are hidden behind closed doors, is because an inspector went out for the state agency or for the federal government and documented these conditions. But often what we find is they just get a warning. So there's one particular person who's been in our reports many times who was found with an emaciated mother boxer. And I remember in particular, a couple of years later, we were putting our report together again, and we could tell from the animal number in that report that same emaciated boxer was still there, and she was getting cited for that same dog again. That dog should not have still been there. That dog should have been confiscated. So it's distressing. We do support these inspections because it's the only way to know what's going on at these facilities. But when people are having violations, either again and again and again, or especially horrific violations, that something needs to be done about it. And that's why we need stronger laws.
And Kathleen, you've been on the scene before, correct?
Yes.
Are there just to drill down even more and give some context to this and kind of paint a picture, are there any stories or any specific dogs or anything that you remember from your time out in the field?
Sure. I was helping our animal rescue team one time when a number of dogs were removed from a puppy mill in Missouri. And in this particular case, we had so many dogs that we were lining them up. We were each holding a dog, waiting for the vets to examine the dogs. So we had a line of people holding the dogs, and the vet was going over each one and documenting their health conditions. And I had a mama dog in my arms who was only about 5 years old. And, when they're bred again and again, their body is pretty depleted of calcium. And while I was holding this dog, a tooth just fell out of her mouth and hit the floor. And I just thought, my gosh, this is something you would expect to see in a 15-year-old dog, not a 5-year-old dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just hideous. I mean, I think that like hearing some of y'all's descriptions, the idea that, so most of the people who go out and get a dog, they're getting the dog because they love dogs, right? And so it's hard to understand how people end up buying animals that support this kind of cruelty. And maybe can you talk a little bit about like where's the gap happening between what's happening over here at the puppy mill and where the quote consumer, the adopter, the pet parent is encountering that dog for the first time?
Right. I feel like there's two main reasons why people end up buying a puppy mill dog. And of course, the first one is they just don't know and they don't see the conditions. And that's the common situation where somebody goes into a pet store and they're told everything they want to hear, or they meet or they buy over the internet, or they meet the person at a third location and they never see where the dog came from. And that's a very easy way to buy a puppy mill dog, because anybody can give a dog a bath and make them smell nice and look nice. And then you take their word for it, not knowing the dog came from a puppy mill. The other common situation we hear of is somebody does go to the facility, sees poor conditions, or sees that the dog doesn't look that healthy, and then they say to us, well, but I wanted to save the dog. And it seems to be there is one common denominator, I think, in both situations, which is that the person has their heart set on a puppy. And they've heard that this particular kind of puppy they want is available, and they're ready to buy when they go. And so sometimes even when they see things that don't look right, they don't want to change their plan because people do love dogs and they're looking forward to bringing home a family member. So that's what we need to get people to do, is just slow down a little bit, and think things through a little more before you make the commitment.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's a great tip. And we actually have, I'm going to take a moment really quickly. We have a really nice piece of video that talks a little bit about how people who are in search of a new puppy for their family can actually recognize the signs that the dog that they're looking at might be a puppy mill. So let's just take a second and watch that, and then we'll come back to our conversation.
How can you tell if a puppy is from a puppy mill? The first red flag, the puppy has a runny nose. Responsible breeders will keep their puppies in sanitary environments and likely won't sell them to a new home if they're looking sick. Not the case of puppy mills, where the animals are packed together, often in terrible conditions, and are exposed to so many other dogs during transport and at the pet store. Red flag number 2. Something doesn't smell right. Literally. Puppies and their moms should look and smell clean when you meet them. If they look or smell dirty, they may have been living in cruel or unsanitary conditions. Red flag number 3. The puppy does not have veterinary documents. We're looking for actual documents on veterinary letterhead with vaccination dates, a deworming schedule, and a comprehensive wellness exam. Red flag number 4. You haven't seen for yourself where the puppy comes from. This is why we advise to never, ever buy a puppy from a pet store. Puppy mills rely on hiding behind third-party sellers who can simply lie about a puppy's origins. Oh, and if they get defensive when you ask questions, that's a red flag too.
So, Kathleen, talk a little bit about online animals. That seems to be a lot of people purchase animals online, kind of haven't seen the facility. Cover that a little bit. And is that an issue? And what are some pitfalls there?
So increasingly, so many of us are doing things online that we used to do in person, everything from banking to grocery shopping. And I think a lot of people have gotten so used to using the online platforms that they're not thinking about buying a puppy online. They're not thinking this might be a problem. But no live animal should ever be purchased online. There's so many issues with it. Not only are they often from puppy mills or kitten mills, but the whole act of having an animal shipped to you that, is often very inhumane. But again, as we were talking about earlier, people have their guard down when they're thinking about that they want to bring home an adorable little puppy for their family, and they see that adorable picture online and they think, well, this puppy looks happy and healthy just based on this photo. Please just remember that anybody can make a website look good. But puppy mills hide behind websites and pet stores. Those are the two main ways that they hide the true nature of their operations.
John, just curious. I mean, one of the things when we think about this issue, I mean, obviously, it seems like there are certain sort of hotspot areas across the country that have this problem more than others. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what those are, and also, if you're not in one of those areas, does that mean you have less to worry about in terms of purchasing a puppy, or is it still an issue wherever you are?
Well, as Kathleen noted earlier, there are puppy mills everywhere.
Mm.
But when you look at the USDA license holders, and there are certain puppy mills that have USDA licenses, about 80% of them are in 7 states. So there's a heavy concentration in the Midwest centered around Missouri and neighboring states. And then also it kind of extends up into Indiana and Ohio. And those are the areas that have the largest number of at least the USDA licensed puppy mills. But no, that doesn't mean that you're in the clear just because you find someone who's a breeder that is in a different part of the country. But I will say there's one thing that the most common puppy mill sales outlets all have in common. And of course, those sales outlets, I mean the puppy selling pet store, the website that will ship you a puppy, the flea market, the person that runs an ad on Craigslist and meets you at the Texaco parking lot. They all have one thing in common. They keep the customer far away from where the parent dogs live. And when the customers don't have that sort of transparency, it's very easy to fool them. It's very easy for the puppy mill owner or the retailer to give them all the assurances in the world, because how are they going to prove that the truth is otherwise?
Yeah.
So there, John, there's, concentrated areas, they exist, but those facilities are still transporting animals all over the country, correct?
They are. And I tell you, that's where a lot of the disease issues really, really get worse. Because already, when you have a puppy born to a stressed out mother dog living filth and misery, you can't be too surprised that, some of the puppies in the litter have health problems. But then to get the puppies to these puppy stores, they put them into these white cargo vans, and they can fit up to 160 puppies in these cargo vans. And they start driving along a route. They're stopping at pet stores all along the way. And so, you leave Missouri and you stop in Memphis, Tennessee. That takes a little bit of time to get off the highway. Then you go down to Jackson, Mississippi, and then you get over to Georgia. And then by the time you get down to South Florida or wherever the route's taking you, some of those puppies have been sitting in that cargo van with their waste pooling beneath them for 3 days. Now, 8-week-old puppies have to poop or pee every couple hours. Nobody's stopping to walk 160 puppies every 2 hours, I guarantee you. So the place becomes a cesspool. And it's an enclosed area. So if one sneezes, the rest of them are inhaling, what was sneezed, and, they could all get sick. People might be surprised that so many of the puppies in these pet stores are sick. I think people should be surprised that any of them are healthy.
God, John, it's like that way you describe the van thing. It's like Santa, except delivering misery and filth. It's like the anti-Santa. It's
the anti-Santa.
Yeah.
The little gifts of love are wonderful, but they're put through hell.
Filled with disease, and they are in incredible torment the whole time that they are being transported, which just, it's gross.
And from the consumer end of it, it sounds like, even if you put aside the suffering, that folks are purchasing animals at pet stores that are going to be, obviously they're not going to be sold as, told that they're sick animals, but more than likely will have health problems.
You don't get a discount because the puppy's extremely sick. That's for sure.
And I think we've talked on this podcast before about the shelter crisis that is happening. Nationally, shelters are overrun with animals. Kathleen, speak a little bit to what's the connection here with puppy mills and shelters.
So what we're seeing now is a little different from what we were seeing, for example, in 2020, when during the pandemic, a lot of people were rushing out to adopt dogs from shelters, which was wonderful for the dogs. But sometimes somebody that went to a shelter to look for a puppy had difficulty finding one. We're not seeing that right now. We're seeing lots and lots of puppies in shelters and also lots of small dogs. So, it's gone back and forth over the years. And unfortunately, a lot of people think, well, I have to go buy a dog because I heard that the only dogs in shelters are, for example, pit bulls or some other type of dog that isn't the kind I'm looking for. It's really not the case. All kinds of dogs, all ages of dogs are in shelters right now. And it's just a matter of looking and being a little bit patient. But generally, of course, the pumping out many, many puppies by puppy mills, of course, does not help the shelters, and it doesn't help the situation with the dog population that we have now.
So, Kathleen, we got a listener question from Lisa Weatherby that asks, what do you say to a friend or relative who has already purchased a dog from a pet store? How do you handle that?
Well, I did have that situation in my family, unfortunately. I've had some people say to me, well, I found out my neighbor bought a puppy from a pet store. I immediately told her she made a big mistake. I try not to do that because even people don't love that. Yes. People don't want to listen when they feel like you're shaming them and criticizing them, especially when they do love their dog. So I think the best thing we can do in that case is, yes, we do want to gently push them to adopt their next pet and maybe think twice next time, but they've already bought the dog. I think the best thing we can do is say, hey, these dogs from pet stores have been exposed to a lot of other dogs. Sometimes they don't come from good places. So if you're, watch your dog very carefully for signs of illness, that you may have been told at the pet store that the dog was coughing because, believe it or not, I've actually heard this. The air conditioning was turned on too high. That's why your dog is coughing. Or, their dog just has a little cold. They need to watch those dogs very carefully for signs of illness. So let's try to bring people along and find out what we can do to hold places accountable if they're selling sick dogs.
So, John, we've talked a little bit about some of the things that I think our listeners can benefit from knowing as, quote, consumers. I mean, I hate even using the term consumer if we're talking about a dog, because obviously that's not how we think about dogs. And I think it's mostly, for the most part, it's not how, people who are going to get a puppy think about dogs either. But I think, we do so much sort of pet owner education around these issues. But can you talk a little bit about where the laws are on this issue and how Humane World for Animals approaches kind of the situations that we can't get out just through consumer choice, and how we're sort of attacking the law from both the federal and the local levels?
So that's a very good question, because that question kind of dictated, the answer to that question kind of dictated the selection of ending the sale of puppies in pet stores as our priority initiative. I mentioned earlier that 80% of the USDA licensed puppy mills are in just 7 states. Those 7 states happen to be states with very large agriculture economies, where big agribusiness has disproportionate influence in the state legislatures. So in the states that need reform for puppy mills the most, they happen to be some of the states where it's the hardest to get the meaningful reforms done. We have a federal law called the Animal Welfare Act that provides some very basic standards of care that the USDA enforces, but they're survival standards at best. For example, the USDA licensed breeder can keep a dog in a cage only 6 inches longer than her body. She could spend her life in that enclosure. Those are terrible standards. Some states have better laws regulating commercial breeders, but I wouldn't say that anyone really has anything that I would consider ideal. That said, they do have to sell the puppies somewhere. And so we've been very focused on shutting off the outlets that puppy mills use to sell puppies to these unsuspecting families.
Profit.
Yeah, exactly. So to date, 8 states and over 500 localities have banned the sale of puppies in pet stores. Over a dozen states have banned the sale of puppies at flea markets and roadside sales. And so all of those efforts are making a difference. The number of USDA licensed puppy mills has dropped by 8% since at the beginning of COVID. So we're making progress, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
So I want to pivot a little bit just because this is kind of a timely thing. I feel like it's Doodle Palooza that you can't scroll through your social media feed without seeing kind of the designer dogs, the doodles. I think Kathleen, this is right up your alley. I think you've got some thoughts on this.
Yes. Well, first of all, I certainly love doodles. I love all dogs. But as a mom, I often hear other moms saying to me, "Well, I hear you work with animals, and I thinking about getting a dog for my family, but one of my children has allergies, and so we need to buy. We can't go to a shelter. We need to buy a doodle." And I always tell them that that is not necessarily the solution. Mixing a Labrador or a Golden Retriever with a poodle does not mean that all the offspring are going to be non-shedding. And even if they're non-shedding, it doesn't mean that you won't be allergic to them. The hypoallergenic tag is a huge marketing gimmick that puppy mills use to sell pretty much any kind of dog mixed with a curly white haired, doodle or doodle poodle, Bichon, this kind of thing. It's a huge trend, and it doesn't necessarily mean that even if you buy one of these dogs that you're getting a hypoallergenic dog. We've also heard that the so-called inventor of the Labradoodle, for example, has greatly regretted making them popular because they aren't necessarily hypoallergenic, and they've been bred so extensively and by the puppy mills. So
Frankenstein. Everybody comes to regret their creations.
I'm
glad this
like, I feel like if I was a dog, I'd want to be an unpopular breed. It seems
Right,
like the popular
exactly.
breeds are always
Yeah.
getting
Yeah.
overbred.
Yeah,
Right.
the world's ugliest dogs, so that you don't get subjected to this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm glad
I
this
mean-
about hypoallergenic stuff came up, because this was actually a listener
Yes.
question as well from Wendy Van Norden, who was asking, what do you do if someone says, I'm unable to find a hypoallergenic dog at a shelter to adopt, so I have to purchase one? I'm curious about, like, is the hypoallergenic dog a real thing? Is like, I'm sure there are some dogs that have like maybe less dander, but is that a real thing?
Not really, no. I mean, everybody's allergies are different. There are non-shedding breeds and non-shedding mixed breeds, but you cannot necessarily predict that that's the sort of the disconnect to me that I don't understand why more people don't see through it. Is if you're mixing a shedding breed with a non-shedding breed, you're probably going to get 50% shedding puppies and 50% non-shedding puppies. If I had a friend that really needed a non-shedding breed, and I'm calling them non-shedding because there's really no such thing as a hypoallergenic breed, but if they wanted a non-shedding breed, I would say go to a poodle rescue or maybe a Shih Tzu rescue. I have a Shih Tzu from a animal shelter, and he's wonderful, and happens to not shed. Love that dog.
Yeah.
But
not just because
yes,
he doesn't shed.
yes, not just because he doesn't shed. He's a very lovable dog, and he's from a shelter. The other thing they need to realize is that he may not shed, but he's not necessarily going to be hypoallergenic either, because the allergens are usually in things like saliva and dander, and not just the hair.
So for listeners that are hearing this and they want to join us, they want to fight back, they want to do something about this, John, what do you recommend?
Well, first off, Humane World for Animals is at the forefront of tackling the puppy mills problem. So we encourage everyone to join Humane World for Animals and sign up to receive our Humane World blog and get our action alerts, because when those action alerts come out, you'll know that that's a signal right there. There's something happening in my state or my city, and I can get involved. But I also encourage people to study the issues they're interested in, really learn about them. You can go to humaneworld.org/puppy mills. We have an entire research library on there so people can really learn the issue. As you're learning and getting excited, and start talking about it, start posting content on your social media channels. But also, I think it's important for people to get organized and get together, because we can't do this by ourselves. A handful of professional staff, we put in a lot of hours and work really, really hard, but we don't have any more hours in our days than anybody else. And so I really encourage people that care about these issues to get organized, work with us or work independently. Let's get ordinances to stop the sale of puppies in pet stores. Let's work with animal control agencies to make sure that they've got what they need to go shut down puppy mills and rescue the dogs. Let's build that political support in a community to really get things done. Because I really believe when it comes to dogs, especially dogs, we can really bring about some really big changes, make some really great things happen, because this is something that transcends all of the different partisan barriers that keep us separated these days. The dogs are a unifier. We should really be able to come together and make big changes happen for dogs.
John, that leads really nicely into something I was going to ask you about. I mean, you've almost sort of preempted my question around sort of with all the sort of tough stuff that you guys see in terms of the inspection reports and in terms of what you see on site at these places. Are there things that give both of you hope in this moment? I mean, like some of the stuff you're talking about with our own volunteers and sort of citizen advocates getting engaged in this certainly must be one of those things.
Yeah, I would say that it is the progress that's being made. I mentioned that 8 states and over 500 localities have banned the sale of puppies in pet stores. And I mentioned that it caused a decline in the number of puppy mills, but it's also caused the size of the puppy mills to shrink. So 2012, the average USDA licensed puppy mill had 87 dogs, 87. By 2022, one of our colleagues did the math. She spent days and days working on this, and she crunched all the numbers and found that the average USDA licensed puppy mill now had 57 adult breeding dogs. Now, that's still a massive number of dogs, but that's a decline of 1/3. And when you calculate that by how many puppy mills there are, that's 32,000 fewer dogs in mills, just because of all these efforts that are being made to stop the retail sale of puppy mill puppies. So that gives me hope. That gives me a lot of hope, and that keeps me feeling energized.
Well, I think let's keep that hope kind of flowing, and let's pause for a minute and show a video, kind of a before and after heartwarming story about Bren.
To see her expression and to see the way that she interacted with the rescuers, you can just see the gratitude. And, I can see it because I see her do it every day. This is what we're going to do, Brittany. It took time for her to learn that that wasn't the only way that life could be for her. Lots of running in the yard, lots of treats, lots of sleeping on the couch. Her and Wyatt, they have a eat, sleep, play rotation. Just seeing her be able to be free, to not live confined, to not be dirty and alone and with nothing. It's 1,000 wonders that she's as well adjusted as she is. It's discouraging because all you can think about is, I can't save them all. But you just got to take one rescue at a time, one person at a time, and hope eventually somewhere the laws are going to catch up. She's never going to have to worry about any of that stuff again. She's going to have a happy life with the things that she needs, with the people that love her. She says, I will never have that life again, ever, 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 right? Yes.
Well, y'all, this has been really helpful. And I think, just for our listeners, like walking away from this, if you guys had one thing that you would want people to know and to take away about this issue, what would that thing be?
I would say, tell your family, tell your friends, tell your neighbors that there are wonderful animals for adoption at the shelter of all shapes and sizes and ages. And we need to encourage people to adopt from shelters and just talk about puppy mills. They still exist. They're still out there. And the best way to avoid supporting a puppy mill is to adopt.
Kathleen, thank you so much. John, Kathleen, this is great information. Thank you so much for doing such great work to stop this cruelty in the puppy mill industry. That is it for us for now. We will see you next time on Humane Voices. And next month, we're going to be talking about all the ways that we work to protect farm animals and what you can do to help on that front. So if you have questions about that work, please send them along to podcast@humaneworld.org. And again, check out our Puppy Mills content on the website, humaneworld.org. Thanks so much.